right, the wait is over. Football season is back as of tomorrow. At least the NFL season. College, of course, already underway. But here to focus on the NFL and break down the Week 1 betting board, ClevTA. Some of you probably already know him as a sports analytics expert, the mastermind behind cleveanalytics.com, the author of the best free NFL gambling preview that you're going to find anywhere, pinned to his Twitter profile. And speaking of, on the platform formerly known as Twitter, you can follow him at ClevTA. That's CLEVTA. TA, happy football season. Welcome back to Props and Hops.
Hey, Matt, thanks for having me. We were talking before about how we've got some illness going around in the family. So hopefully everyone is healthy enough for me to, they're being a little selfish right now. Hopefully they're healthy enough so that I can watch football all day on Sunday.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking time to have this conversation. And of course, I hope that you can get that time on Sunday as needed. And we will jump into a lot of what's going to be taking place Sunday, as well as, Thursday, Friday, and Monday. A pretty full Week 1 slate spanning much of the days to come. Before we dig in, want to thank the audience for joining us live on Twitter and YouTube. For those of you who've done so, feel free to jump in the chat with any thoughts or questions along the way, and we'll weave that into the show where possible. In the meantime, TA, I'd love to kick this off by touching a bit on your NFL preview. Again, for my money, the best free guide that anybody's going to find anywhere from a gambling perspective. And I think one especially important factor for anybody just diving into this now is that the length. Very digestible, 1 page per team, plus some other good strategy and insight beyond the team level. It features some excellent research presented in a way that's very easy to understand. No shortage of betting value. For example, last year I had a winning bet that paid out 18-1 on Lamar Jackson to win the MVP award. That can be drawn directly to last year's NFL preview that you put together. So TA, focusing on the 2024 season, in the 2 months since you published the preview, I'd be curious for your thoughts as to one bet on which you double down and perhaps one on which you'd call off due to new information over these past couple months.
Yeah, I mean, I feel lucky that when I released this back in early July, a lot of my opinions have either been shared with the market or just other people have found similar positive results. But I think that I like Seattle a lot as a sleeper in the NFC from a over win total, alternative win total, and then the playoffs to make the playoffs. That number is, jumped on my side as well. So, I've heard a lot of, sharper guys that have similar opinions. So that always makes me feel good. But that's one I really do feel positive that Mike Macdonald's going to turn that franchise around. I think he's going to immediately improve one of the worst defenses in the NFL last year, dead last in EPA on high leverage, 3rd and 4th downs. So if he could just get that to league average level, I think this could be a really interesting team in the NFC West. And if, the Niners do stumble a little bit and, who knows what happens, you never know with the health of a quarterback situation in San Francisco, maybe they'll make a run at the NFC West. So that's one that, I definitely like. I mean, the Eagles I picked them to win the NFC and the Super Bowl. This is, again, back in end of June, early July. Had not heard much from anybody on that front, but now it feels like that has been a recurring theme as a kind of, if you're going to pick anyone but San Francisco, a lot of people are picking Philly. So I guess that kind of them doing well in the NFC would be another one. I guess, in the AFC, I was down on the Ravens and talk a lot about a lot of the changes that they were seeing. And then obviously, if I like Seattle with Mike Macdonald, it would have to affect Baltimore a little bit. And so I do think them going under their total and, maybe not being one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the AFC are probably a couple of the things that I would double down here.
And with regard to the Seahawks you led off with, I'm seeing a price point right around plus 650, I'd say is probably about consensus at this point. Does that align with a buy point for you?
To win the NFC West?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I would sprinkle a little bit there. I like when I find teams that I think will surprise or will do, I like to diversify a little bit. So, sprinkle a little bit on that to win the NFC West, but really focus on going all over the alternative win number at 9.5 is probably the big one for me. At good plus money. I think I got it maybe at plus, I'd have to double check, but I think it was like plus 220 or something a couple, like 2 months ago, and make the playoffs. I think 190 is what I got. So, those numbers I would kind of lean into more, and then just, a sprinkle for the NFC West just in case, right? But I think 650 is a decent number. They have a very easy start to the schedule, knock on wood. Obviously, starting week 1 with Denver and Bo Nix, and they got New England in week 2. So, and I know they've got the Giants early in the year, so they could get off to a hot start. And all of those division numbers, those playoff numbers, the Mike McDonald Coach of the Year is another one that I liked, along with Kevin O'Connell. They're the two that's evaporated, I think, in the marketplace.
Yeah.
Either. So those are going to all evaporate if they can get off to a hot start, like I think they will. So if you're interested in those, I would take them now.
All right. Yeah. And I hear you on Seattle plus 650 to win the NFC West, maybe worth a bit of exposure. Also, the alt wins over 9.5, still seeing plus 195. When you talk about things like the Mike McDonald Coach of the Year market, of course, part of the trade-off of your preview coming out when it does and the market influence you have means that some of these numbers will have evaporated, to use your word, by the time we get to this point so late in the offseason. And while sometimes the market will move strongly in your favor, I'd say more often than not that's the case. Another trade-off of doing the preview as early as you do is that new information may come to light between the time you publish the preview and the time the season kicks off. So to that end, is there anything that you recall feeling strongly about when you put the preview out there in early July that you might want to take a do-over on based on new information at this stage?
Yeah, I was looking at some of my predictions this morning, and there's nothing that's just way off. I would say, along with Seattle, Minnesota was the other NFC team that I liked as a surprise, kind of sleeper team that could get to double digits and make the playoffs. And part of that analysis was I thought I'd get, what I call 2 bites at the apple at quarterback to work with Kevin O'Connell and all those weapons that he has, with JJ McCarthy and with Sam Darnold. If Darnold was not, if he was not able to turn around and produce a Geno Smith-like season from 2 years ago, or a Baker Mayfield season like last year with Tampa, kind of coming out of nowhere with a high pedigree background, at least I had JJ McCarthy in my back pocket, and he could have been a guy who could have elevated this team. And so obviously he's now out for the year. So I get hurt a little bit there. I do like that they added Stephon Gilmore on defense. That was a positive. But maybe I'm not as strong on that one. I still like them as a sleeper, but that number I think has moved against me a little bit in the last few weeks because of that. And they do have a really tough schedule. So week 1 is a big one. And if they don't beat the Giants this week, it's going to be really hard, I think, for them to reach some of their upside. So that's a big one, I think, for me from a futures perspective. And then the AFC, nothing really stands out too much. I would say the one is maybe I had the Buffalo Bills in first place and the Jets second in the AFC East. Maybe I'd flip-flop those. I think I'm a little bit higher now on the Jets than I was back in late June. Still had them, exceeding their win total, but I think I would have them as the AFC East leader, and I think the market has adjusted to that as well. I think the last I saw, they were favored to win the AFC East, so I'd probably lean a little bit more on that route. But there's really nothing that stands out too much that I would change in that regard. I think in general, I feel pretty good about some of the predictions I made and some of the projections. So, I did well the last couple of years, and I feel like sometimes your first answer is always your best. So, I think I feel pretty good overall.
And when it comes to the first answer often being the best, it might mean by the time we're approaching these final 32 hours or so before the season kicks off, there's not a lot of meat left on the bone when it comes to futures and season-long props. But that said, TA, before we dig in specifically on week 1, any thought as to either what you're watching closely this final day and change, or what you might be pulling the trigger on in this final day and change when it comes to futures or season-long props before kickoff in Kansas City?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've been talking about the offseason for so long. Like I said, I put this together, this NFL preview starting in mid-May all the way through June. So this has been a multi-month kind of analysis and process. And so I think I've got everything in place. I know it's kind of the hot, sexy name, but I really do think that the Texans have what it takes to make the Super Bowl. So there is a potential opportunity. I might just, because I know I'll have FOMO if I don't do it, grab them in the futures market to win at least win the AFC. I'd like to get, if I can get 10 to 1, I haven't really searched enough, but if I can get 10 to 1, I think that's a pretty good number in the AFC. But that's probably the only one that I'd look at is maybe look at some of the Houston Texans futures, and to kind of go deep into the playoffs. But otherwise, I think I'm pretty well set in that regard. Oh, there was one other one. I have not looked at it. And not sure if you have access to it, but comeback player of the year is one that I had not dabbled in this year. And I think that Kyler Murray, I've heard some talk as kind of sleeper MVP candidate. I just don't think that Arizona has the chops to win 10, 11, 12 games that you need to get there. But I do think their offense has a potential to be really good. I think their defense is atrocious. Unfortunately, they bad coming in, and they lost Darius Robinson, the first-round pick. They lost B.J. Ojolari, who's one of their best edge rushers. They're going to really struggle, and they've got a tough schedule, so they could be in a lot of shootouts. So Kyler Murray has a chance to put up a lot of empty yards, if you will, but he's going to put up stats. And so if they can get to 7, 8 wins, 9 wins, he has a shot to win comeback player of the year. And so that's one. If you can find something, I think 25-1 or higher. If that's out there, I haven't really shopped it around, but that's one that I think is really interesting because it's coming off an injury, which is kind of the new definition. It's not coming off of being bad like it has been in the past. It's coming off of an injury is really the key definition here. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers is going to be the leader there, but his number is so low, it's really not worth evaluating that one. I think that Kyler has a shot. So that's one that I'm going to look at. If I could find one at that range, I think I'll take a stab.
All right, I'm doing some real-time shopping around here, and it looks like, okay, the first number I saw was 20-1 on Kyler Murray. I am seeing a 25-1 at a leading regulated U.S. book, so we can consider that widely available. Yeah. And I like the angle there because in the last really just couple weeks, I feel like I've started to hear more about upside for Arizona this year relative to where they're being priced. Again, if somebody's bullish on the Cardinals, it doesn't mean that they necessarily think it's more likely than not that they're going to dethrone San Francisco in the NFC West or make a deep playoff run. But based on where they're priced, if they're getting a lot of steam in the regular season win total market, maybe early season against the spread, that can suck a lot of value out of the equation. But comeback player of the year for Kyler Murray correlates nicely with that outcome, but it's downstream enough that the value would probably last quite a bit longer than some of the first thoughts people might have if they want to make a bullish bet on the Cardinals.
Yeah, and I've discussed this a lot. I've got a free article up on my site. I've discussed in the preview in terms of like the parameters and the historical profile of an MVP winner. It's not, you really do have to win at least 11 games. And that's at the minimum. I mean, I think, Matt Ryan might've been the only, I'm trying to remember who somebody had 11 wins that won it, but that is a minimum. It's usually 12, 13 wins. And it's just with that schedule and that defense, as much as I've got I know Jonathan Gannon pretty well. I've been talking about the Eagles and the Cardinals the last handful of years since he's been there. And so I've got an affinity there and I want them to do well. It's a year early, in my opinion. Their defense is so bad. And this is a really tough schedule that they're playing. And if I think Seattle's better than expected, it's going to be even harder. It's just find it hard to believe that they can get to 12, 13 wins for him to get MVP. So I think this angle is a little bit better. He could still put up stats. They don't have to win a ton of games. If he really overwhelms from a stats perspective, that can get him this award. And again, everybody has a price. Murray at 25-1 for this award feels a lot more doable than even a 40 or 50-1 in the MVP market. So I think it makes sense.
And I like the fact that you're going with something like Kyler Murray 25-1 to win comeback player of the year, because as I thought about a transition to week one, starting with the props, putting the props first and foremost, as with the name of this show, I think of you as an expert with long shot markets, like comeback player of the year, quite possibly with Murray this year, also with things like first touchdown scorer. Now, my gut instinct as a bettor and the way I approach things is that index markets where you're basically betting into non-binary outcomes. It's not a yes or no or an over under this team or that team. There are 3 or oftentimes many more options in one market. That's a good way for books to hide a lot of vig for bettors who aren't very astute with how the math of this all checks out. And TA, of everyone I know, I think you're the best at overcoming that, Vig, to find betting value to accompany the entertainment value of risking a little to win a lot. So maybe kind of along the lines of what we were just talking about in the comeback player of the year market, when it comes to something like first touchdown score in a game or anytime touchdown score in a game, how would you describe your process to identify betting value in that market?
Yeah, look, I'll be honest. You're right. The hold on those markets are just so ridiculous from the books, and it's even worse now. I think the numbers have gotten, especially like anytime TD and those sorts of things, they're all nuked. And so when I go into the first touchdown market, I'm wide eyed. Like I'm not expecting to find, oh, this is just great value, right? I'm doing it more for fun, but I've done some research on it. I have one of my analysts who put some research together too, and it's so skewed typically, or historically, it's been so skewed to the favorite and the running back, right? Like that is always the leader. And if you just ran the numbers, it did never correlated, at least in recent years, that never really correlated to the type of odds that you were seeing. So it wasn't so much that, some of the long shots have great odds. It was just avoiding the very low end of the market. It's, the running backs were, plus 150 or plus 200 to get first TD. They never correlated to that. It just, the math never worked out. So it's more of just avoiding those. So I always like to look deeper in the down the board at 10-1 plus. And, like I said, it wasn't that the value was that great on when I go to find some of these. It's a fun one, and I'm putting very low stakes on it. I'm limited to a point in a lot of these books where I couldn't even put more than enough to really matter. So I'd have to spread it around. But it's really just trying to find teams that maybe, I like backing the underdogs, and tight ends, especially tight ends, I would say are the underserved market in this first TD market. A lot of times when you're at the goal line, you go multiple tight end sets. A lot of times you got to go heavy personnel packages with certain teams. So the second tight end gets a lot of value there. For whatever reason, there's just a lack of, I guess, interest in the market on those tight ends. But that's one I've noticed a lot is the tight end market being pretty good in that regard. Quarterbacks who can scramble, typically you get some decent value there. But really, this is, like I said, I'm not hunting for the best value in the world. It's more of like a fun market that you don't have to put much on. Everyone can kind of enjoy. I like posting them, especially for the primetime games, because it's kind of everyone's a community enjoying them together. So I'm not blind to the fact that these are probably poor EV bets. They're just more fun, and you only need to win one or two a year to really pay off the entire season. So that's really what I'm looking at. And, just so happens that I've been successful. And, again, digging into usage and personnel usage and different areas of the field where defenses are maybe weaker than others. I've got access to all that data using play-by-play. So, I try to lean on that a little bit more. So those are some of the things I look for. But again, it's not the most positive EV wagers that I put out there.
Understood. And I've got one quick follow-up thought and then a follow-up question for you to this end. First up, the thought would be taking your point of avoiding the obvious answer, perhaps, in this case, the running back on the favored team, and going a bit deeper down the board. That notion is probably going to come back and play later on in this conversation when we can weave in a little bit of survivor strategy. But sticking with the first touchdown scorer market, I feel like I'm already getting some buzz of Isaiah Likely for Baltimore in the season opener at Kansas City. Your thought about tight ends, a backup tight end on the underdog. I'm seeing Likely lined at 29-1 to be the first touchdown scorer. Wondering if there's anything that piques your interest there, or if there's anything else across the week one slate that might have your attention in that first touchdown scorer market.
Yeah, I'll be quite honest. I have not looked into those yet. I think Likely is a good candidate there. But, I also think of Patrick Mahomes rushing touchdown. He tends to run the ball much more in these tighter line games, these bigger games. Like you see his rushing stats increase in the playoffs and in the Super Bowl because of that. And so that's one that, typically you could, you see more, greater than 15-20-1. So that would be one just offhand, if that's the number that
21-1.
Yeah, there you go. So that's interesting to look at. But yeah, I think, obviously Derrick Henry now throws a monkey wrench in that, because this is a run. Look, let's be honest, this is a run heavy offense when you get to the goal line. This is what Baltimore does. So even though I did say it's hard to fade, the top running backs, Derrick Henry, that's what he's brought in for, to really help their goal line situation. So, that's a tough one you're gonna have to fade, but I think Isaiah Likely is a really good choice. I think they will play more 2 tight end sets this year. The lack of outside weapons. I think Rashad Bateman is a guy who is likely to step up a little bit. So I don't know what his number is, but I think Likely and Bateman would be the 2 guys I would look at Baltimore, if, again, assuming it's 15-1 plus. And then Patrick Mahomes, I think on his end, is a guy who, I think is interesting on the running. I mean, last year I had a lot of success. Justin Watson was a guy who was always undervalued early in the early midseason. He was getting a lot of goal. He was the tallest receiver at the time for Kansas City, a bigger body. So they were throwing to him a little bit more in the red zone than the market was anticipating. So that was one that I was looking at. I just don't know how the Kansas City wide receiver market it's going to shake out in terms of usage. So that's a tough one for me. So I would, like I said, I'd lean Mahomes on that end, and then maybe Likely or Bateman on the Baltimore end, if I just off first blush.
Yeah, and to your point with Bateman, I'm seeing him lined at 22-1 at multiple books. So I think you said you'd be looking for north of 15 or 20-1. So that might check the box to at least have some interest there. And one obligatory PSA, TA, as you're talking through different players and different numbers you'd be looking for, just shopping around, especially in a market like this. We're not going to see on Don Baster, on Spank Odds, too much of books being able to copy each other in this market. So the first number I quoted for Isaiah Likely was 29-1. That was at FanDuel. I pull up DraftKings, 35-1. On the flip side, Mahomes, only 18-1 at DraftKings, 21-1 at FanDuel. So sometimes they'll be aligned on price. Sometimes one player will have a better price at one of the books and a different player would have a better price at the other book. So as always, not saying everybody needs to have 10 plus books and shop around religiously, but even 2 or 3 books, if you compare prices in markets like this, beyond any specific players you pick, that might be the best way to maximize your ROI and by extension, your entertainment value over the course of the season, if you like to bet first touchdown scores.
Yeah, and these are so low, low volume, typically markets that it doesn't take much to move the numbers. So they'll fluctuate, and so they don't catch up to each other. It might be just so happen that a handful of people are taking Likely on DraftKings, but not on FanDuel or vice versa, and so you get a little imbalance there. It's not like they're copying each other necessarily. So shop around. You can find definitely there's been even bigger gaps than that in the past with some of these names. So that's definitely always a good idea, is to shop around with those markets.
Indeed. And TA, another long shot market where that same ethos could apply would be most passing yards on the Sunday slate. So this would be for 13 games, excluding Thursday, Friday, and Monday. Adam Chernoff brought this up yesterday on the Simple Handicap podcast. 2 candidates caught my attention. I wanted to run this by you. This will be a blend of Adam's thoughts as well as mine. One was Tua Tagovailoa, 8-1 at DraftKings at last check. And we've seen Mike McDaniel and Tua come out of the gates on a heater to start a season. Thinking back just to last year, 466 passing yards against my beloved Chargers. The Dolphins coming into week 1 this year with a healthy and dynamic set of skill position weapons against a beatable Jacksonville defense. So possible consideration for Tua at 8-1, again, to have the most passing yards just on the 13 Sunday games. Another candidate, much better odds theoretically, but thinking about the realistic probability, maybe about the same. Will Levis at 28-1 at last check. Playing in the Brian Callahan scheme this year. We saw promising results down the stretch when Callahan was coaching up Jake Browning in Cincinnati. That may translate to Levis. Also, this is a chance to possibly lean into Levis as a high variance quarterback. We saw his propensity to take some deep shots last year. He was top 10 in air yards per attempt under offensive coordinator Tim Kelly, who is now coaching tight ends for the Giants. So TA, I'll pause there. Any point of view on the market for most passing yards in general, and for Tua and or Levis in week 1 specifically?
Yeah, that's funny you mentioned that, because I've kind of evolved, first TD market. I've done a lot more with these weekly specials. I love them. They're so much fun. So I do look at the quarterback yard. It's usually the quarterback yardage is not the variance there. I didn't refresh it last year, or for this past season, but last year in the off season, we looked at the prior couple of years and what the leading yardage quarterback look like? And it was a lot of the big names. You don't get a lot of long shots in that market per se. Again, I didn't look at it last year, but so the variance wasn't there as much to kind of go up the board. But you do get that the rushing market was a huge one. I mean, just there were random guys left and right. But I do love the Will Levis call. I'm actually, I'm sure we'll talk about it. I'm on the over in that Bears Tennessee game. I have it at 43. I think it's all the way up to 45 now. So, our friend the Hitman decided to tail me on that one.
That's how I'm down on that one too. Thanks to Hitman.
Yeah, and he sent me a message. He goes, "I like your pick," because I send my subscribers as kind of an all-encompassing subscription package, but I give out my personal. But when I personally make a wager, I just kind of give those out for full transparency. So that was one. He said, "I like that one. I'm going to take that one too and send it to my list." I said, "Thanks a lot." So he jumped on that one. So I think that's exactly what you said. It's going to be a high variance team, high variance offense. Will Levis pushed the ball down the field a lot in the preseason. You're going to see the Brian Callahan using a lot of 11 personnel at the top 5 highest rate in Cincinnati. Is going to bring that to Tennessee. It's too bad Hopkins isn't playing in this first game, most likely, but they still have enough weapons. I think, especially with Ridley out there. I think Burks will end up having a pretty good year. And I think the running backs of the backfield with Pollard, they can catch the ball, Pollard and Spears. So that's an interesting one from a long shot perspective. I will say in that same Miami game, I like Trevor Lawrence as I think he's 16-1. I see. I actually think that one is one that I might take myself. I think I'm high on the Jags offense this year. I think they're going to play in a lot of shootouts. They drafted a lot of these teams tell you what they want to do, right? In the offseason, they drafted Brian Thomas and they signed Gabe Davis. Both guys are kind of explosive down the field bigger body weapons. And we saw that in preseason a lot. I think, we saw way too much of Trevor Lawrence going horizontal instead of vertical, a lot of like screens and quick dump offs and quick outs instead of really pushing the ball down the field. And I think that's a big emphasis this year. And we saw those 2 acquisitions. I think that's really going to help. Brian Thomas, by all accounts, was awesome in camp and in preseason. It was only a couple of drives, but Trevor Lawrence pushed it down the field a lot. He was he was PFF's number 1 graded quarterback in the preseason for whatever it's worth. I mean, but I thought he looked really good. And like I said, I think if he could get some protection on that offensive line, I think he's going to push it down the field. Miami to me, the pass rush is really weak. Chubb is out. Jalen Phillips, I'm not sure if he's going to play or not. He's coming off an Achilles injury. I don't really want to expect much, even if he does play this week. They thought Shaq Barrett could be a veteran replacement. He retired abruptly a few weeks ago. So they're really relying on Chop Robinson, a rookie, and not Andrew Van Ginkel. There's somebody else on the outside, maybe Emmanuel Agba, to be their pass rush. I'm not really worried about that. I don't think they have a pass rush. And outside of, Jalen Ramsey is really good, but there's other ways to attack this team down the field. And I think that, they're going to have they're going to have a chance, or Lawrence is going to have a chance to push the ball down the field. And they obviously have to keep up with this Miami offense. So I think there'll be a lot of points here. So I tend to agree. I think that's a high scoring game. I'm actually on that over. That number's still available at 49. That's what I got it. So it's still within range. I think it's going to be a shootout. I think both offenses will have plenty of ability to move. So Lawrence in the same game, I think it's a shootout. I think it'll be a tight game. Could offer a little bit more value in that regard.
All right. Yeah. And double the payout of Tua. So if you think it's anywhere near a toss-up as to who has more passing yards and a chance to lead the league in passing yards on Sunday, Tua 8-1, Lawrence 16-1. So some really good food for thought there. TA, we've covered some good ground on touchdown scorer markets, most passing yards. Anything else that you're watching for closely or that you consider actionable as far as week 1 goes from a prop betting perspective?
I say it's a little early. I usually do my prop. I write up every game, do all the matchups. And so that kind of lends me to props that I like, or at least players and matchups I like. So I'm a little bit different. I'm not a big props guy per se, outside of some of those long shot markets. There's way better, people out there that really specialize in that sort of thing and really delve into the weeds. There's just so many out there. It's just hard to keep track. I'm more of a sides and totals guy. But what happens is when I put all this analysis together for all of these games, it kind of gives me a path like, oh my God, I think this is a really good matchup for this team and for the specific player. And so I try to attack the positive matchups as much as I can. And I just try to attack it that way with a lot of overs. And so I know typically unders are the way to go with props. And I totally agree with that. But the way I do it is just I try to find the very specific matchups that I think there is positive EV on and go in the over with just a couple a week. I don't really take that many props. So that's what I do. So I'm still in the process of doing that. I think so I haven't really dug deep, so I'm sorry for not giving you a big answer.
Good.
But one guy that I would love to see, if there are props, I think Jalen Naylor is a guy to look for in Minnesota as a wide receiver. He's our number 3 wide receiver. He had a great camp by all regards. We know Kevin O'Connell likes to use 3 wide receiver sets. If you can find a prop on him, I mean, I'm not even sure if he'll be listed, but if he is, and if he's in the teens, I think it's a really, really nice wager to go over. I think, he's got an opportunity to be a guy that it goes under noticed, I guess. I mean, Jordan Addison does have an ankle sprain, so he may not be 100%. Who knows how many snaps he'll get on Sunday? So Naylor could see a bigger role. So if there's anything out there, and maybe you won't see it till Saturday or even Sunday morning, that's a guy that I'm going to be looking for if I could find a number that makes sense. But that's all I've looked at so far. I think, like I said, Trevor Lawrence, I like the long shot with the most passing yards. I mean, I don't know what his prop number is in the passing yard market, and I have to analyze. I don't even know what his average was last year, but I'm going to attack the Jags offense a lot early this season because I think they're being a little bit undervalued in the marketplace. I think there's definite value in that team and in that offense. And I think Trevor Lawrence is right for, if you want a long shot MVP, that's one guy that I think of amongst, it's very hard to find long shots these days because of the kind of the cat's out of the bag with the type of players that win MVP. He's probably the one that sticks out amongst those, but I think, that's an offense that I think can really go. And I think Miami, like I said, some of the defensive changes, some of the losses in the offseason is tough. I think the fact that if you look at last year, they faced the single easiest schedule of opposing offenses. They faced a ton of backup quarterbacks. So, they may be a little bit overvalued in terms of kind of the market from a defensive standpoint. And the Jags faced the 5th toughest schedule by opposing defenses. So, I think there's some value there with Trevor Lawrence. So those are a couple that I would look at offhand.
All right. So Trevor Lawrence, I'm seeing MVP odds of 30-1, and for week 1 passing yards, anywhere from 251.5 to 255.5. Any thought beyond 16-1 is a potential flyer to lead the league in passing yards on Sunday? Any thought in terms of those prices to win MVP and or to go over his passing yardage total in the low to mid 250s?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking last year average 251. I don't know what his median number, but I'm assuming it's pretty close to that. I think he's going to have a better year than what he had last year. So if it's priced in line with that, this is a total that's close to 50. It's going to be hot in Miami, like upper 80s. The weather seems okay. I think it might be a small chance of showers, although I think in Florida there's always a chance of showers in late summer. But I think you've got an opportunity to get a really major shootout, and so the 250 number seems pretty solid. I don't think they're going to be running the ball as much as they did last year. So I do really think there's an emphasis on the deep passing game. So there could be a little bit of value there on the over and passing yards, and even like if I have a situation like this that I think there could be kind of an outlier, I would look at a lot of the alts to kind of ladder it. If you could find a 300 plus at good plus money, that could be interesting as well. So that is definitely one that I like.
All right, sounds good. A lot of optimism around Trevor Lawrence and the Jags passing game. Just, I feel like doing my due diligence, if you will. While I'm not a fiduciary, I would say certainly plenty of correlation between Lawrence to lead the league in passing yards on Sunday, Lawrence to go over his passing yardage total, Lawrence alt yards over, Lawrence MVP. So if you want to get in on this, have some fun with it by all means, but just consider, if you're listening to this conversation, the correlation there to make sure that you can enjoy this without being overexposed on any one outcome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I say absolutely. Like I said, I mean, the MVP one is just I'm just saying, if you just wanted to toss some peanuts before the year, on a longer shot, that is the one. Him and Richardson were the two kind of longer shots that, could fit the profile. Like I said, I wouldn't, if you just wanted to put, a few bucks just to say you have it and track it all year, no problem. But I think early in the year, I think attacking Lawrence's prop market could be another way to play. It doesn't have to win MVP, just that he's going to outproduce what the market is expecting. So it's always fun to get some of those long shots. And again, something that's 16-1 or 30-1 is not expected to happen a lot. So I expect to be wrong in that case. But if it hits, it pays off and you're happy. And like I said, those are the fun ones to take advantage of.
Yeah, and plenty of fun ones that you just threw out there. I guess I'll get to a few that may be less fun in terms of juicy payouts, but perhaps in terms of betting value, maybe there's something to it. I'll run through a few leans and then one bet that I already consider actionable. TA, for these leans especially, I'd appreciate any quick initial thoughts you may have. We don't need to belabor the point, but just off the cuff, if you have a short reaction to a few of these thoughts. The first one I'm looking at is Travis Kelce receiving yards under. I'm seeing 58.5 widely available. And this handicap is similar to a breakdown I gave last week on the show pertaining to a season-long bet on Kelce receiving yards to the under. Thinking of load management, especially early in the season, Kelce had as many games with double-digit targets in the playoffs last season as he did the entire regular season. And to the extent that the off-field narrative matters in Kelce's life right now, I think it's unlikely to help with his on-field production. So TA, specific to week one, Kelce under 58.5 receiving yards. Any thoughts on that as a potentially playable option?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that number is already accounting for a lot of that. Maybe I'm wrong.
Very fair. Yeah.
If you look at it, I don't know what his median number is, but I know his average is in the mid 60s last year, even in a down year. And I'm just looking like he cleared that number. If you look at the early, I mean, he was coming off an injury. In his first game against Jacksonville, it just only went 4 for 26, but then he had a handful of 60 plus games, a couple hundred games. So I agree with you that they'll probably want to handle him, take care of him a little bit, but maybe in game one they might let him get a big chunk of the snaps. I'm kind of indifferent on that one. He's a tough one to evaluate this year because of I think he's being a little bit like you said. Last year at the end of the year, he kind of came out of nowhere, and I'm not sure if that was an outlier or they're just saving him. So I'll just consider that an indifferent, but I do think some of that number feels accounted for.
Very fair. I'll move right along then. Malik Neighbors, longest reception over 21.5 yards, mostly flat fig in the range of -110 to -115. Thinking of Neighbors, I expect him to have about as big of a role as we've seen from any rookie receiver in recent memory. We recently got confirmation that Brian Daboll going to be calling the plays for the Giants. I consider that to be a positive for Neighbors and the offense. And then this week's opponent, Minnesota, defensively very aggressive. That can lead to some feast or famine outcomes. And I wouldn't be surprised if that resulted in one or maybe two explosive plays for Neighbors. TA, any thoughts on Neighbors' longest reception to go over 21.5?
Yeah, that one, that's exactly what I was going to say. With Brian Flores' defense, he can send, go cover zero blitz. And I think against Daniel Jones, he'll do that a lot. He's going to try to disguise things. But as we saw in the preseason, Daniel Jones is going to look for Neighbors a lot. And I say if you get all you need is one kind of broken play or a one-on-one against very average cornerbacks from Minnesota. I think that makes a lot of sense. Is attacking his one. I think it's a better shot at going over that 21 on the longest reception than maybe get a bunch of small ones per se. So I do like that one.
All right, yeah. All it takes is one, maybe famous last words for a lot of prop bettors, but given this matchup and Neighbors' role in the offense with Daboll at the helm, I think I'm feeling good enough to take the plunge on that one. TA, my third and final lean to run by you here would be looking at Bo Nix completions over 19.5. This one's caught some steam. At last check, I saw a consensus price in the range of -130. And I get the optimism, thinking of Nix's skill set and Sean Payton's scheme, looking for some timely releases, not necessarily a ton of yardage for Nix, but a lot of short, high percentage passes. Another thing that could bode well for Nix is that while he's a rookie, he's already 24 years old. So he's entering the league pretty polished, maybe a lower ceiling in the long term, but a higher floor in the short term. Also, with Denver being about a 6-point underdog at Seattle, if they're trailing late, I think that's likely to translate to more passing throughout the entirety of the game. And with Seattle missing their best edge rusher up front in Uchenna Nwosu, that gives me some optimism. Of course, to look at the other side of the coin, we're talking about a rookie quarterback making his first start in the league on the road in a hostile environment, with the opposing head coach being Mike Macdonald, who we now well know is a defensive mastermind. So this could cut both ways. TA, what do you think on Nick's over 19.5 completions in the range of -130?
Completions are not, I mean, that's not one that I typically dabble in as much. I do like just kind of the yardage, but it's interesting. I mean, it makes sense. Obviously, that's what he did at Oregon. A lot of quick passing. We saw that in the preseason as well. Maybe a lot of dump offs. I can imagine, Sean Payton just being, being conservative and running a lot of swing passes and screens and those sorts of things. So I think that's fine, just off first blush. But yeah, I mean, I don't think he's going to be pushing it down the field as much. It's going to be more short, but Mike Macdonald knows that too. So he might be, stacking the box a little bit more. So yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't have a major problem with it. I think the idea behind it, and the process makes sense. And, sounds like others are interested as well with that, with the juice at -130. Might be worth, I don't know what the value of half a completion is in the prop market, but maybe you wait to see if there's an adjustment and get, if you can get a -115 or something at if it's a half a completion higher, could be worth it. But yeah, I like the idea behind it.
Got it. Yeah, very fair thoughts looking at both sides of this. I'd say I'll take the tepid endorsements or just neutral opinions on Kelsey and Nix, but feeling pretty good about the neighbors look, longest reception over 21.5. And then TA, one prop that I consider bettable, and I'll also be interested in any initial reaction on your end, would be Rams Lions on Sunday night. Shortest touchdown under 1.5 yards. I'm seeing that at -166 at DraftKings, -170 offshore. Now, this is the signature prop of the Props and Hops podcast.
This is your Super Bowl prop, right?
Exactly. Yeah. When the right matchup presents itself, and of course the right price, then I'm all about this one. I will say books do seem to be catching on with some steeper prices. I would make -170 a price ceiling to get involved here, but I do still see enough value at that number for consider it a reduced wager, maybe something in the range of 0.8 of a unit instead of a full go. And the handicap here, we're looking at the highest total on the week one board, a consensus of 51 at last check on my end. And more points bodes well for the prospects of more touchdowns boding well for the odds of at least one 1-yard touchdown. And for any new listeners here, I know this prop might sound very oddly specific, but it's a lot more common than most people would probably think at first blush. Something like pass interference in the end zone could set this up very nicely at any stage of the game. And even without flags playing a role, the field tends to get really compressed near the goal line. And in this matchup specifically, I really like the aggression that the Lions bring to the table. From a coaching standpoint, if we see a 4th and short in fringe field goal range, Dan Campbell quite likely to go for it. And I think that makes the Lions more likely to get to a goal-to-go scenario from the 1 on any given drive. And then Ben Johnson staying on board as the play caller. I think he's always got an ace up his sleeve for a high leverage down. That could include a 4th down anywhere on the field, and especially a possible 4th and goal from the 1. Looking at the personnel as well, the Lions have a stout offensive line, and this could be especially valuable for short yardage downs when Aaron Donald's presence might be missed the most in this one. Crowd noise, probably a non-factor at home for the Lions, of course, so they should have seamless communication near the goal line. And on the other side, Sean McVay, Matthew Stafford, Kyron Williams, and the Rams offense, not too shabby in their own right. So TA, any thoughts on a bit of a steep price point? Let's call the cutoff -170 to get involved on Rams Lions shortest touchdown under 1.5 yards.
I mean, I don't think you need a thumbs up from me. It feels like you've done the analysis here, and I know the pricing. I just haven't done the number. I haven't run the math to see how often it happens, but it sounds like enough that a -170 is valuable. So I agree with you. I mean, a highest scoring game on the board. You got two. I mean, McVay, he's very conservative at the goal line. kind of to his detriment. It's funny for a guy who's such an offensive mastermind. He loves to run the ball inside the 10-yard line. So, and then we know that Ben Johnson loves to run it too with Montgomery at the goal line. So you get multiple shots at getting to the one on top of the pass interference. So I think it all makes sense. And I think the last time I was here, you recommended it, and so I'm gonna go and it hit, and I'm gonna go with it again. So I agree.
Yeah, and to your point, the handicap matters a lot, but the price is ultimately what matters most. And I think I would put this at about a 2 out of 3 likelihood of occurring, which would translate to -200. And because I am not a mastermind with this, I want to build in a bit of wiggle room. So I wouldn't want to lay up to -200. I think -170, just enough there to still go ahead and consider there to be betting value on this prop. And TA, at this point, we've talked a lot of props for week 1. Want to make sure to address other markets as well. Any thoughts you may have on sides, totals, teasers, any derivatives? I know you already touched on a total earlier on when we were talking Jacksonville, Miami. I think you said you lean, if not like, the over 49.5. Anything else in non-prop markets that catches your attention on the week 1 board?
Yeah, that one is fine. I have under 43 with the Cowboys Browns that just got hammered, so that's off the table. The over, as I mentioned, the Bears Tennessee's off the table. I have Niners and -3.5 before the Trent Williams news. That's off the table. So I would say what's left. I like 2 things. Well, this one's probably off the table now too, unfortunately. But Atlanta's team total under. I have under 23.5. I'm not sure if it's still available. But here's the situation with Atlanta. I think I'm actually surprised. I think the Right Angle Sports guys they took the over in this game. And so it got me to I was waiting for it. It got me to a range to get over 23.5. 23 is a key number in team totals. I think it's just an avalanche of headwinds facing this offense, especially Kirk Cousins. So you got a guy who's, approaching 40, coming off a major Achilles injury. Okay, easy. That's an easy handicap. He did not play in preseason. So he's got a shot to be rusty. He's got a brand new offense, brand new offensive coordinator, brand new head coach, brand new teammates. This is pretty much an unprecedented situation that I can recall of a situation even close to this. I just find it hard to believe that he's going to be in midseason form. Atlanta, I know they're going to run a lot more 11 personnel with Zach Robinson at offensive coordinator, especially versus what they saw with Arthur Smith last year, who was more heavy personnel. But contrary to popular belief, the Rams did not throw the ball a ton out of those 11 personnel situations. They actually threw it at the second lowest rate. They ran the ball a lot, and they actually were below expectations from a pass rate over expectations under Sean McVay last year. So I don't think they're going to throw it as much as I think some are assuming. They'll throw it more than Arthur Smith, that's for sure, but not to the level that it's like greatest show on turf here. So I think there's a little misconception with the type of offense that they'll be running. And again, all those headwinds. I don't want to deal with small sample sizes here, but I've been tracking these quarterbacks that don't play in preseason. It's only been a phenomenon in the last couple of years, really since 2017-18, it started to happen. And I've been, kind of fading it the last couple of years. It's been pretty successful. And I am only I like to pick my spots when it's in addition to my handicap that I mentioned. These quarterbacks, there's been 36 quarterbacks since 2017 who did not play a single snap in preseason, and their week 1 numbers are all almost across the board worse than their baseline season averages. I mean, we're talking only 36% of teams have gone over their team total for quarterbacks who didn't play in preseason in week 1. Now, there are some exceptions. I mean, Justin Herbert and Matthew Stafford, it's occurred like 5-6 times between these two quarterbacks, and they've actually performed very well in those spots. But for whatever reason, everybody else has essentially struggled in aggregate. Even Kirk Cousins himself twice went under the team total. They lost last year to Tampa in week 1. So again, that's not my main handicap, but it's like a cherry on top. I think rust factor, new offense, all those sorts of things, playing against an aggressive Pittsburgh defense. Like, is he really going to drop back 40 times and, sit in front of the pass rush of the Steelers and be effective? I think he's going to be antsy. I think he's going to, I think the Falcons are going to ease him in. So I think that's going to be less of an aggressive offense than you'll see later in the year. And then, I mean, I think the Steelers are going to play in those hands as well. Like they're not going to, I don't think they're going to be chucking the ball down the field a ton with just George Pickens at receiver. I think it's a lot of running because they've got Arthur Smith as their OC. So long-winded answer. I've thought about the under in the game, but I think a safer play is Atlanta's team total under. Like I said, I think 23 is a key number. If it's 22.5, call it minus 105 or better. It's okay, but 23 is really an important number. So the better, closer you can get to that, the better.
I'm seeing minus 130 at one book and minus 128 at the other. So similar price points. Any thoughts at that vig? Yeah. Say minus 128 vig attached to Falcons team total under 23.5.
Yeah, I mean 23 is a very common number in team totals, so it happens a lot. And its problem is you can't. There's not many options here, so but I do think I like this one in particular. I think all those factors, so I think that's and I did see that. I mean, again, not that these trends matter, but it's just a pattern. I mean, Mike Tomlin, his defenses don't allow 24 plus points a lot. I think like a quarter of the time in the last couple of years, teams have scored that. So look, we know it's a Steeler defense. They're going to be solid. So I like that under 23.5. And I've got one side for you if you want.
Sure.
So I like Carolina plus I got a 4.5. Sure. 4.5 is fine. Anything above 3, I think is okay. This is one that I forgot to mention in kind of the do-overs. I have them 4-13 in my preview. I think I'm a little bit higher now than I was on them back then. Closer to 6 wins, I think makes sense. I do like that, they've improved the offensive line, especially up the middle, to signing 2 new guards. That's Bryce Young because of he's shorter. It's tougher to see. You want to, if there's areas of the offensive line you want to improve, it's the interior. The interior pass rush is what really hurts him. He finally got Deontay Johnson, a real weapon. Xavier Leggett, rookie, could be another upside weapon as well. So good offensive line, better offense in general. They were in a lot of games last year. Their defense played well. They just couldn't score. That's crazy. They're bottom 5 in the last 20 years in yards per play on offense. They're one of the worst offenses in that regard. So, the market is valuing them as, this line was 6, I think it closed late in the year in New Orleans last year. And it's 4.5 now. I think New Orleans is a tad worse, and I think Carolina is significantly better, especially on offense. So, I do think that this makes sense. And also, New Orleans is not a team that I love. Dennis Allen, pretty bad as a front runner. Derek Carr, not the greatest quarterback you want to back as a favorite over a field goal. He's not the type of guy that extends leads. He's pretty conservative. That offensive line is one of the worst in the NFL right now. Without Ryan Ramczyk, they lost James Hurst, who's a really good and valuable swing tackle guard. He's not there. So that offensive line is going to struggle early. And, I want to fade a team that needs to extend the lead and to win by margin with a really bad offensive line. That's just a principle that I like. So, to me, I think Carolina can keep this interesting. And I think 4.5 is a good number. I would, sprinkle the money line if you want as well a little bit, but I do think 4.5 is a good number.
Both of those music to my ears. When it comes to the Falcons team total, I'm not sure if I'm going to bet it because I already have some exposure on the Steelers in teasers, and that's me misreading the market. I did not see this line heading to 3, let alone some books shaded toward 3.5 if they're not already there with Atlanta on the full game spread. So if the Falcons can't score a lot, then if nothing else, that will bode well for your team total bet and hopefully by extension, my Steelers teaser exposure. And when it comes to the Panthers side of things, I too have the Panthers plus, I think I have 4.5 in pocket, but yeah, plus 4 the current line. I think you said down to 3.5. You considered that good. And I like the alignment there. It does give me a bit of trepidation thinking about Survivor. This is a tough week 1 Survivor slate if you don't want to go with the obvious option. And even that obvious option in the form of Cincinnati losing some of its luster as Jamar Chase looks less and less likely to play. We can touch on Survivor a bit later on, TA, but wanted to give some initial thoughts on your looks at Falcons team total under 23.5 up to minus 130 and Carolina plus 4 being the consensus price. I'd also like to run one side and one teaser by you in these markets beyond the props on the week 1 board. And the side that's catching my attention right now would be Indianapolis +3 -120 or +2.5 at even money hosting Houston. This is another one like the Steelers. I misread the market here. My Colts exposure in this game is in teaser form. I did not think we would see a 3. And that's not to say I don't respect Houston's turnaround and CJ Stroud's remarkable rookie season last year, but I just wonder if this number in this matchup is going too far. Week 18 last year, the Colts were competitive in this same setting with Gardner Minshew at quarterback. Now they've got Anthony Richardson back. The Colts' ground game could be a force. And on the other side of the ball, I think there might be a subtle familiarity advantage. The Colts becoming the first team to get a third look at Stroud and the Houston offense. When we talk about the price, +3 -120, definitely better in terms of pure win percentage. I think the +2.5 at even money, likely a touch better in terms of long-term ROI. The thought being that the jump from +2.5 to +3, probably worth about 18 cents. Maybe I'm splitting hairs here. Calling it 20 cents, I have no problem with using that as a round number. But I feel like the +3, obviously going to win more, but the lower hit rate on +2.5 probably overcome by paying even money instead of laying -120. TA, any thoughts on this one from your perspective when it comes to both the side and that price point?
This is probably the toughest game. This is the one game I have no exposure to right now. I don't think I will. I understand the value concept from last year. I think the line close. Did the line close in at Houston -1 in Indy in that game? Was right around there. I will say I agree with you that Richardson taking over for Minshew is a positive, but at the same time, I think Houston's much better with all their offseason acquisitions as well. So net, it's about the same. The more I talked about this earlier, I wanted some exposure to Houston. The more I think about it, I think I like Houston more than I initially thought. And I don't want to fade them at all, especially in a situation where you essentially need to win. I think if you're looking for a teaser look, Indy at 8.5 on a teaser isn't the worst idea. And I think they're one of those teams that will keep games. They always keep games close. The blowout's probably not likely, but I also don't want to need them to win this game, which is essentially what you need at 2.5, in my opinion. So, like I said, I understand your thought process. I'm just not as high on this defense. They essentially are, running it back on defense. They signed everybody back. Their secondary is not good at all. It can be very much exploited. And there's a chance that, just Houston is just better than the market is giving them credit for. And everyone's looking to be contrarian when there's just really, sometimes it's just right in front of your eyes that the team is really good. So, like I said, I think a teaser look isn't bad if you want to tease them with the Bengals, but as a second leg, fitting the one long teaser. But from a pure side perspective, I'll put my hands up. It's not a side that I think I'm interested in.
Very fair. I will steer clear of any endorsement on that side as well, especially when it comes to my personal bankroll with existing teaser exposure on the Colts. And speaking of teasers, TA, you touched on the obvious one, Cincinnati at -1.5 hosting New England. I think the second leg that I'm intrigued by the most right now would be the Giants up to +7.5 hosting Minnesota. That is a Giants home game, right? Let me just double check myself there. Yes, the Giants are home. Yeah. So Giants +7.5 hosting Minnesota. Full disclosure here, my week 1 teaser exposure is tied to some preseason games, and this segment will be geared toward the point of view of only teasing week 1 games. An obligatory caveat, looking to cross through those key numbers of 3 and 7 with a price cutoff of -120. Now that -120 is increasingly hard to find, especially if people are in Nevada, once known as the capital of the sports betting world. Now it looks like teasers are just not much of a part of that market, but that price point -120 on a 2-team 6-point teaser in the NFL, widely available, thinking of books like DraftKings in the regulated market and market makers like Bookmaker in the offshore market. So looking at these two legs, starting with the Giants, speaking of market makers, I like that Circa has the Giants at +1 right now. And with Circa being a market maker in its own right, this feels almost like getting 6.5 points for the price of 6. So it's saving 10 cents on this wager, and maybe less a bet on the Giants, TA, but more a bet against Sam Darnold blowing out another NFL team. As much as I respect Kevin O'Connell and the way he held things down without Kirk Cousins last year, I'm just expecting a close game in that one. And then with Cincinnati on the other leg, Jamar Chase's status TBD, not looking good right now. but I do think we've got some asymmetric risk. If in the unlikely event we see Chase confirmed in, this line possibly steams right out of 6-point teaser territory.
Yeah.
And if he's confirmed out, I feel like maybe the line drops a touch more, but it's hard to see Cincinnati going off as less than 7.5-point favorites, taking the superior team here at home to do little more than win outright. TA, I'll pause for a moment. Any thoughts on the week 1 taser slate, specifically the Giants and the Bengals?
Agree with the Bengals. Everything you said is exactly right with asymmetric risk. I agree. So I'm a positive Vikings guy. So, and this is where it gets difficult when you have a lot of full season exposure, and especially when this is such a high leverage game for all my Vikings exposures. I'm staying away from that because you do, and I think Las Vegas Chris has talked about this maybe on your show.
I'm thinking exactly of Las Vegas Chris as you speak.
Because he's right. Dynamic. Like I think generally you're in the right side in terms of teasing the Giants. I actually kind of like Minnesota, just the -1.5. But a teaser, if I didn't have any exposure to Minnesota, I'd be like, yeah, it makes sense, right? A home dog against the Sam Darnold, it should be. But then the other side of my brain says, well, I really like Minnesota, and I think the Giants stink. So, this could be a double-digit win. But you're generally right. I think all bias and kidding aside, I think that's probably, if you're going to tease, that's probably the other leg. If it's not the Colts. To pair with the Bengals. I will say, I don't know about you, Matt, you tell me, I like to audit my prior year track record. And I was, a few weeks ago, I was taking a look and I knew it wasn't great. My teaser record last year was atrocious. And all I did was, it was all, standard, Stanford Wong, through the 3 and the 7. I got my ass handed to me. And I had a pretty decent year last year. But teasers accounted for a majority of my negative units on losses, and I'm not really, and I, doing my -120 legs. I don't know what it is, but last year was really poor. And I think 2 years ago wasn't great either. So I've kind of vowed to stay away from the teaser market for the short period. I'm just going to see how it plays out early in the year generally. But, I think I've heard others talk about this, that teasers weren't great for them last year. So I don't know about you. You tell me. It's interesting, even in a low-scoring environment like the NFL has been, the fact that teasers didn't come to, the Wong teasers didn't play out very well for me. It's a little bit interesting, and it's kind of, I'm a little bit scarred from that.
Yeah, that's a really good call out because I know teasers were not good to me last year in a sample size of more than 100 teasers I touched over the course of the season. The ROI was north of, I guess, south of -4%. And 2022, not exactly looking great either. So that's a really good call out. I guess I'm going to check myself when it comes to bankroll management here, because I do think that 2 bad years in a row, it's a red flag of sorts. And at the same time, even a couple hundred games in the NFL, not the biggest sample size. I think a lot of people I respect say they look for a sample size of about 1,000 games before they take it too seriously. But that said, if there's something that we're missing for 2 years running now, then it's worth keeping an open mind there. I feel like the value getting -120, if not better, there are still a few shops that will offer even better odds. If you're crossing key numbers and getting the right prices, I still have faith that in the long run, that's a plus EV proposition, but it's not worth just blindly assuming that anymore. So I really appreciate what you shared there. And I think of the lower scoring environment maybe being a bit of a false sense of security, because last year I had some really good conversations with guys like Sharp Clark, Las Vegas Chris, even Rufus Peabody, looking at all sides of just the qualitative standpoint, the quantitative standpoint of how much totals really matter in teasers. And I used to think totals mattered significantly in teasers. Now I think at the extremes, they can be a nudge in a certain direction. Lower totals may be a nice nudge to go ahead and tease a game. Really high totals may be a nudge not to do so, because you're still getting 6 points, whether the total is 56 or 36. So those 6 points relatively much more valuable in lower scoring games. But it's not the be all end all that I used to think it was. So I think that's a very shrewd point you bring up about monitoring ROI on teasers and maybe not just blindly assuming that it's plus EV because you're crossing key numbers and getting -120 or better. to the point of minus 120 or better not even being as accessible for a lot of people on 2-team teasers, I also think it's worth noting that some books are paying fair odds on bigger teasers. If we look at 3-teamers plus 160 or better, 4-teamers plus 250 or better, 5-teamers plus 450 or better, these are numbers that you are probably more likely to find at a lot of books than you are to get minus 120 or less on a 2-teamer. And if we're thinking about that through the lens of the week 1 board, some legs to possibly add that we haven't discussed yet. Maybe the Packers up to plus 8.5 against the Eagles on Friday in Brazil. Maybe the Cowboys up to plus 8.5 at Cleveland, although that one is shaded toward the 3. So to me, that reduces the value of crossing through the 3. And maybe I'd only add that one if I needed one more leg for a good price on some of these bigger teasers. TA, any thoughts as to maybe 3, 4, 5-teamers having value that's tougher to find on 2-team teasers these days, and the notion of considering Green Bay or Dallas as part of that week 1 portfolio?
Yeah, I mean, I think both make sense. Yeah, I haven't really dabbled much in the 3-team market, but I am interested in looking at that, running some more analysis on that. I actually, with 10 points, I would think that the teasing up totals might make more sense in sides. But again, that's just theoretical. I don't have any data behind that. I'm just thinking, I feel like totals tend to be closer to the market number than a side would be. So you'd have a little bit more leeway there. But again, I'm just hypothesizing. So that'd be something I would look at is maybe teasing some of these totals up in the 3 legs, especially the low totals, and just seeing, with no weather involved. I think if you kind of exclude weather and you take some of these lower kind of low 40s and just see how that's performed historically, I would like to run that analysis, because that seems like a decent leg. I will say one thing, I know we always talk about long teasers, and that's how I've always, or at least always the last handful of years, have been following. I did make some exceptions, and one of them just being, like, I remember when Seattle with Russell Wilson, they would just never they were almost blowout proof. He was just the type of quarterback that would always, even if they're down 2 touchdowns late, would always try to score, try to get that backdoor touchdown. And it was just very, very rarely that they ever lose by significant margins. It only happens Kyler Murray's kind of that way sometimes. If you look, there's just a lot of guys, like those types of quarterbacks, especially the mobile ones who can make plays. Those are very valuable. So even if you're like, okay, I'm sitting at 3.5 and it's not necessarily long teaser level, I would consider getting over that 8 as a valuable leg in very, very specific situations. If I'm going to violate the long teaser method, I need to find something like that. So that does happen on occasion, but yeah, generally. But I'm more now I'm going to dig in a little bit on the 3-teamer and see if the total teasing down totals is effective at all.
Yeah, I like the outside the box approach that you're talking to here. I do not have the expertise to say with conviction that touching totals is a great way to go, or going outside of the long scope is going to be plus EV in the long term. But in the cases that you specifically mentioned, if there's a sound rationale behind the decision, no rules are set in stone. So I think it's totally fine to color outside of the lines when there's a thoughtful process behind it. And to that end, TA, a couple final notes on teasers. I have a couple thoughts on bankroll management. One, being mindful of exposure on any one team in the case of playing that same team, perhaps in 2, 3, 4, or 5-team teasers, wanting to guard against a bad outcome for that one team having too much of an overall impact on the bankroll. And then also keeping in mind that some of these bigger teasers will result in bigger swings. The more teams in a teaser, the less often you'll win. And that can be overcome by the better payouts when you do win. But an example I'll think of here is that, say your standard bet size is to win $100. In a 2-team teaser at minus 120, you'd be risking $120 to win 100. So the amount to risk plus the amount to win equals a $220 swing. And I would make that $200 swing the baseline. And to smooth out the peaks and valleys of bigger teasers, consider the same or similar $220 swing. 3-teamers at plus 160, maybe risk 85 to win 136, a $221 swing. 4-teamers at plus 250, risk 65 to win 162.5, a swing of $227.50, and so on. Just going to throw that out there. There can be a lot of peaks and valleys. You and I have both experienced plenty of valleys in teasers over the last couple of years, and bankroll management can really be the name of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like teasers are your specialty, so I will trust you on that. I'm a little bit scarred. I shouldn't be, but I am. So I'm going to be a little more conservative in that. To me, like my standard sides have been my bread and butter. So I'm probably going to do a little bit more of that this year. Not that I did a ton of teasers last year, but I just felt like, but just my record of teasers is way worse last year than any other segment. The last 2 years really. So, stick to your knitting is a piece of advice I've always gotten, just when investment related or, betting related. And so, I kind of dabbled in teasers a lot more as we kind of went along because they had been successful and they, there was a strategy that made sense, but I think I'm going to stick to my sides and totals and props more than anything. So, I'll let the experts on the teaser side kind of play with that, because I think there's probably different methods and strategies that make sense. And when you evaluate the pricing, you can get, positive expected value. But, for me personally, I'm probably less on that end than I am on standard sides and totals.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And TA, at this point, knowing we're about 70 minutes into this conversation, things have a way of happening when I connect with you where we just get deeper than I expect, and for great benefit to myself and I think the audience when it comes to value in the futures betting market, props, week one sides, totals, and teasers. I'm going to jump ahead a bit. I wanted to ask you about maybe some X factors for your Browns or my Chargers, considering we're both still fans at heart, but I think maybe we can save that conversation for another day. Let's round the corner here and weave in one more topic before the two final quick pillars of the show. When it comes to cleveanalytics.com and all the great work you've been doing there, one new feature this year, a survivor tool. And I think the biggest name in the game is Circa Survivor. They surpassed 10,000 entries earlier this week, meaning that prize is guaranteed to be north of $10 million at this point. TA, a quick two-parter here. Top advice for people playing survivor pools in general, and top advice for people playing Circa Survivor specifically.
Yes, as you mentioned, we I've done survivor analysis in the past, just more general kind of here's some of the the options I think make sense. We've created a tool that just all it does is optimize win probability for the season. It gives you an optimal path depending on the size of your pool and the different rules. One of them being, the Circa Survivor pool, which is very it's a specific type of survivor that includes Christmas Day and Thanksgiving, along with Black Friday as specific weeks that you have to pick from. And again, a much smaller sample of games, which makes it a lot more interesting and difficult. But it makes sense because it's such a big survivor pool. You'll never get it's 20 weeks. You'll never find it'll be chopped like hundreds of ways if we didn't include that. So it just adds to the strategy too, because you're going to have to hold teams back. So understand, I think my rules of advice are understanding the rules of your pool. So little nuances like that. Understanding the size of your pool, because there's going to be different strategies when you're talking about, just like a sub 100 or 200 person pool, neighborhood pool versus, you're in Circa Survivor has got, 10,000 plus entries. There's going to more chances have to be taken in something like that to win. Whereas in a smaller pool, you're really trying to, and our tool does this, it really maximizes for the first 12 weeks because you have a much likelihood of the pool being won 3/4 or so of the way than you will in a large pool that's going to likely get to a chop or some sort of a split at the end. So that's something that we have is you can click kind of the size of your pool. So understand the rules, the size of your pool, understanding it's not just about, some people will say, all right, survive and advance. That's just not true. If you're trying to win your pool, it's not about survive and advance. It's about mapping out the optimal path and understanding game theory and who other contestants have remaining in terms of teams, understanding what kind of the pick estimates are for your pool, understanding how do you compare that versus, actual win probabilities of these teams. If you have two teams, one team's 75% win probability based on the spreads, another team is 72%, but one team is being picked by 40% of your pool, and the other one is, estimated. And these numbers are out there, and we'll post them we post them every week. And let's say the other team is 10% of the pool likely is going to be picked. Yeah, I mean, you're clearly going to take you should take the 70 slightly lower win probability with the much lower pick percentage estimated from contestants. And so all those things, are factored into this, and also future value. How often could they be used in the future as well? And so we do that on the site. We use kind of everyone has a different estimate and definition of future value, but we use, if you've got at least a 65% win probability during a week, and these are all based on look ahead spreads. They'll be updated again weekly basis. So you have at least a 65% win probability for that week. And then you're also within the top 75th percentile of win probability of that week. So essentially the top, 3 to 4 win probabilities, you get, you are essentially considered to be part of, you've got future value, if you will. And then there's like more methods to kind of the percentage of the future value and all those sorts of things. But we've got that all on the site. So you can see, all right, if I take Cincinnati, for example, this week, very popular team, they have a lot of future value. They have like 5 or 6 other opportunities that they fit in that category that I just talked about. So it's fun, but it's really hard, and you have to make tough choices. And the larger the pool that you're in, the more, I guess, contrarian you should be, as long as it's contrarian versus what, the estimated pick percentages from your pool that you're estimating. So that's really the key here. It's factoring all those different sorts of things, and then somehow surviving the big upset. Nothing once you make the selection, it's out of your hands, and that's where the fun begins.
And some people are going to win big when it comes to Survivor. A lot of us probably not going to win any given pool. TA, to start rounding into the final pillars of the show, that's where the hops can come into play. Whether you're drinking to celebrate or maybe drinking to take your mind to a different place after bowing out of Survivor, the hops may come first and forefront at various times throughout the football season for some. And thinking back over the 6.5 months, I guess, how would you describe your go-to beer or perhaps non-beer beverage over the course of this NFL offseason?
Yeah, I drink less and less beer. I know it's probably you're probably sickened by that comment.
That's all good.
But I feel like when you have kids and you don't have much time, you just kind of have a more of a relaxing, like, I just want a drink at night after they go to bed. Beer just isn't my drink of choice these days. Used to be, but not anymore. I like to pop open a bourbon, my Blantons. That Kentucky bourbon that I like. So I'll take, put that on the rocks, or, mix a little bit of different flavors, if you will. And then I'll either do that, or, when I go golfing, that's the other time I like to have a drink or a beverage or two. I've been drinking a lot of high noons. That's a big one here. And fusion drinks, great fusion drinks. So, those are a couple of my go-tos, I guess, during the summer, especially when I have a drink or two. But, generally I'm just not as much of a beer drinker anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah, very fair. And as I like to maintain on the show, as much as I call out hops being in the name of the podcast, there's a time and place for everything. And some of the best guests I've had here don't drink it all. So all good. And when it comes to Blanton's, I feel like that is better made than most craft beers are. So can't go wrong with something like that, and can't go wrong if you're enjoying a high noon on the golf course. So totally hear where you're coming from there. TA, final question for you. Last but not least, the Malinsky Minute. People catching this on video on YouTube or Spotify may notice a slight update to my background here. Photos that Dave took on Mount Charleston in the company of bristlecone pines, which he called his old friends in high places. I literally have Dave's shadow over my right shoulder. Thank you to my wife, Allison, aka Mrs. Props and Hops, for an incredibly thoughtful gift to tie this room together like never before. And I know Dave was unable to get to Mount Charleston as often during football season, but he's still unplugged in ways such as queuing up the jukebox with classic rock and supporting small, local, independent mom and shop restaurants. TA, how would you describe your go-to outlet when we think about life beyond the betting boards to maintain the best possible lifestyle throughout the grind upon which we're embarking with the start of football season?
Yeah, I mean, I think exercise is obviously a big one, even if it's just taking a walk in your neighborhood. Obviously, I'm in the Midwest, so as it gets colder and during football season, it's harder to do. But even just getting a workout in is big. But, for me, I've got 2 young kids now, 2 young daughters. So kind of there are times I'll spend an entire Sunday just stressed out, and maybe I had a bad Sunday or a bad beat at the end of the day, and I'm really kind of frustrated. And then I see my kids. I know it's a little cheesy here, but see my kids, and it's just like, all right, what am I, what am I really doing here? Stressing out about things like that. So spending time with my kids, especially like for me, Saturday afternoons, I really make it a point to take my daughter to dance class, or my other daughter, the swim lessons, and kind of enjoy the Saturday afternoon before I'm going to be locked in my basement watching every play of every game on a Sunday. So to me, like, those are the two things: either exercise or just spending time with my kids and my wife, and try to disconnect 24 hours before a football Sunday are probably the two things. I do miss out on some college football, but it's okay. I got to ration up my non-NFL days as much as I can. So sacrifice something. And so it's usually college football during NFL season. But those are the two things I like to do.
Well, on that note, TA, we have been live now for an hour, 20 minutes. I could easily go for another hour, 20 with you, but I will let you get back to your day, back to your family. We'll go ahead and wrap things up. To the audience, thank you for tuning in. Best of luck with your week 1 bets. If you're not doing so already, make sure to go ahead and follow TA on Twitter at ClevTA, and check out his work, namely the free NFL preview guide and all things going on at cleveanalytics.com. TA, thank you as always for your time and insight. Best of luck with your week 1 bets and all season long.
Thanks, Matt. You too.